Okay, imagine this. An entire economic union spanning, what, 3 continents, hundreds of millions of people. And it operates for decades without standard market prices or even, like, proper exchange rates. Sounds almost impossible.
I think that's stretched the imagination a bit.
Well, today we're tearing open the files on just such a system. We're diving deep into COMECON, that's COMECON, officially the Council for Mutual Economic Assistance. You can think of it as the Eastern Bloc's ambitious economic counterpoint during the Cold War.
Yeah, and our mission today, really, is to understand not just what COMECON was, but why it operated the way it did. What were its goals? What were the surprising challenges it faced? And ultimately, what's its unique legacy, especially when you compare it to something like the EEC, the European Economic Community?
Exactly. We'll look at its very foundation, how it sort of evolved or maybe didn't evolve under different Soviet leaders, and we'll uncover some genuinely fascinating details about how it tried, and let's be honest, often struggled, to manage trade and production across this huge membership. You'll basically get a shortcut to understanding a crucial and I think often misunderstood piece of 20th century history. And this deep dive, it draws from quite extensive research, right? Historical analyses, economic studies you've looked into.
That's right. A lot of digging into the archives and economic data.
Okay, so let's start this journey, this Cold War economic experiment. What was COMECON fundamentally?
Well, at its heart, COMECON was an economic organization. It was definitely under Soviet leadership, bringing together the Eastern Bloc countries, plus some other socialist states later on. It was around from 1949 right up until 1991.
And the name COMECON, it applied broadly, not just the central body.
Yeah, often people used COMECON to refer to pretty much all the multilateral economic stuff happening between the members, not just the official council's work.
Okay. And you mentioned it was a counterpoint. So it was basically the East's answer to the Marshall Plan and the OEC in the West, that organization that became the OECD.
Precisely. It was the Eastern Bloc's direct response, explicitly set up as an alternative economic system.
So what was driving Stalin to set this up? Was it just about countering the West?
That was a huge part of it, absolutely. Stalin wanted to strengthen ties with those smaller Central European states, which were getting cut off from their old markets. Yeah. But the real turning point, the moment of truth, you could call it, was July 1947.
What happened then?
Well, Czechoslovakia, Hungary, Poland, they actually showed some interest in Marshall aid. But the conditions attached things like convertible currency, market economies that meant closer ties to the West.
Which Stalin couldn't accept.
Exactly. Totally unacceptable. So he ordered them, their communist governments, to pull out of the Paris conference discussing the aid. And that, right there, marks this huge ideological and economic split in post-war Europe.
But weren't his motives a bit murky? You hear different things.
Oh, definitely. Some historians call his motives inscrutable, maybe more negative than positive, meaning he might have been more worried about keeping other powers out of his buffer states rather than genuinely wanting deep economic integration within them.
So defense more than offense in a way.
Possibly. And things like GATT, the General Agreement on Tariffs and Trade, with its non-discrimination principle.
Yeah.
That just didn't fit with the idea of socialist solidarity. Plus, there was a practical issue.
Which was?
How do you trade between centrally planned economies?
Yeah.
You need some way to coordinate prices. Otherwise, you've got the state as the only seller facing the state as the only buyer. A monopolist versus a monopsonist.
Yeah.
Without a market, setting prices becomes, well, arbitrary. You need coordination.
Okay, so coordination needed, political motives. When did it officially kick off, and who were the first members?
It was formally established in Moscow, January 5th to 8th, 1949, announced publicly a bit later, January 25th. The founding group was the Soviet Union, Bulgaria, Czechoslovakia, Hungary, Poland, and Romania.
Albania and East Germany joined soon after.
Right. Albania joined within a month, East Germany in 1950. And there's this interesting detail from recent Romanian research.
Oh, yeah. What's that?
Elena Dragomir suggests Romania might have played a key role in proposing it. Their leader, Gheorghe Dej, apparently wrote to Stalin in late 1948, pushing for it, hoping to get better access to industrial equipment through trade.
Wow, Romania. That's surprising. You usually just think of Soviet dominance from the start. What does that tell us?
It hints maybe at an early phase where smaller members still thought they could shape it for mutual benefit, but that didn't really last.
How so? What was the initial direction?
Initially, the idea was coordination of national economic plans. But crucially, COMECON itself had no coercive power. Decisions needed everyone to agree unanimous ratification, and then each country had to implement it themselves.
Sounds a bit toothless.
It was. And then Stalin stepped in around mid-1950. He basically put the brakes on. The Soviet Union was shifting towards autarky, trying to be self-sufficient, and Stalin preferred just meddling directly through embassies, not these constitutional bodies.
So COMECON almost died right there.
Pretty much. Its scope got officially limited to just practical questions of facilitating trade. Very narrow.
But even in that early, stifled period, some weird policies emerged, like this Sophia Principle.
Ah, yes, the Sophia Principle. August 1949. It was quite radical. It essentially dismantled intellectual property rights within the bloc.
How did that work?
Technologies developed in one country were made available to all the others for basically just a nominal fee, just covering the paperwork costs.
Who did that benefit?
Well, obviously the less industrialized countries, including, interestingly, the Soviet Union itself, which lagged technologically in many areas compared to, say, East Germany or Czechoslovakia. They were the ones who lost out, seeing their innovations shared for peanuts.
So a policy that looks cooperative on the surface
Actually undermined the incentive to innovate in the long run. It kind of baked in stagnation right from the start. That pattern of prioritizing political goals or short-term fixes over long-term economic health, that would really persist.
Okay, so Stalin's grip nearly choked COMECON, and policies like the Sophia Principle created underlying problems. But he dies in '53. Did COMECON get a second wind? Did things change?
They did try. After Stalin's death, COMECON, which was, barely functioning, started to get looked at again. Countries began cautiously moving away from strict autarky and started talking about complementary specialties.
Right, this is where it gets interesting. As you said, they talked about specialization, like what, Soviet oil for Polish ships or something, coordinating the big 5-year plans?
Exactly that kind of thing.
Yep.
Trading raw materials for manufactured goods, trying to align those massive national plans. It was a more ambitious vision for integration.
It wasn't smooth sailing.
Not at all.
Yeah.
Almost immediately, you had major setbacks. The Polish protests, the Hungarian uprising in 1956, those events caused huge disruptions. Governments had to focus on just regaining stability and legitimacy. And the Soviet 5-year plan for 56-60 basically got thrown out the window.
Still, they kept trying.
Yes, the efforts continued. They introduced this thing called the convertible ruble. We can talk more about what convertible really meant later.
Right.
They revised the specialization plans, and they even adopted a new charter in 1959. Interestingly, it was modeled, at least structurally, on the Treaty of Rome from 1957, the one that founded the EEC.
So trying to emulate the West's success in a way.
Maybe hoping to achieve similar integration, but through socialist planning, of course.
Yeah.
But did that transnational planning actually take hold? Not really.
Khrushchev pushed for it, though. Didn't he call for, like, a single planning body in '62?
He did, a common single planning organ. But it meant strong resistance. Romania, which was becoming increasingly nationalistic under Gheorghe and later Ceausescu, was particularly forceful in rejecting it. They absolutely refused to be designated as primarily agricultural specialists.
People wanted to industrialize.
Precisely. Among the Central and Eastern European countries, only Bulgaria really went along readily with the assigned role Moscow envisioned for it.
So the takeaway is,
The key insight here is that even the mighty Soviet Union couldn't just impose deep economic integration. National interests, sovereignty, those were powerful counterforces.
did any integration happen then?
There was some progress, yes. Limited progress, mainly in sectors like petroleum pipelines, electricity grids connecting the power systems, and some scientific and technical cooperation. They founded the International Bank for Economic Cooperation in 1963, that convertible ruble bank.
But overall,
COMECON countries actually ended up increasing their trade with the West more than they did with each other during this period, which tells you something of where the real economic dynamism was.
that really speaks volumes. Okay, let's move into the Brezhnev era, post-'67 or so. Did cooperation manage to become real integration then?
Well, they certainly changed the language. But first, a key structural change happened in 1967. Remember how decisions needed unanimity? That was a major bottleneck.
Right, so what changed?
They adopted something called the interested party principle. This basically meant a country could opt out of a specific project or initiative if it wasn't interested, without blocking the others who were interested from going ahead.
Trying to get around the veto problem.
Exactly. It was partly seen as a way to let Romania, for example, pursue its more independent economic course, without having to leave COMECON altogether. They could just step aside from things they didn't like.
And then the language changed too.
Yes. After 1969, the official talk shifted from cooperation to integration. The stated goal became more ambitious, equalizing the differences and relative scarcities of goods and services across the bloc, trying to level the playing field, supposedly.
But those underlying challenges you mentioned, central planning, the diversity, the sheer size of the Soviet Union, they didn't just disappear, did they?
Not at all. Integration remained constantly frustrated by national central planning systems that just didn't mesh well. The membership was also getting more diverse. Mongolia had joined earlier. Cuba joined in 1972, Vietnam later.
Which added even more complexity.
Huge complexity. You had highly industrialized nations like East Germany and Czechoslovakia, alongside largely agrarian or underdeveloped economies like Mongolia or Vietnam. And looming over it all was what analysts called the overwhelming asymmetry with the Soviet superstate.
Give us the numbers again on that.
By the early 80s, the USSR accounted for something like 88% of COMECON's total territory, and around 60% of its population. That imbalance shaped everything. There were attempts to create cross-national industrial associations trying to bypass some of the national planning issues, but they often just became new layers of bureaucracy.
Were there any bright spots economically during the Brezhnev years? Any successes?
Well, one significant development in the 70s was tapping into those huge Soviet oil and gas fields.
Ah, the energy resources.
Exactly. The East European members benefited massively from cheap Soviet energy supplies. Prices were set within COMECON based on sort of rolling averages of past world prices, so they adjusted very slowly.
Meaning when the 1973 oil crisis hit the West.
COMECON countries were largely insulated from it, at least initially. They continued to get relatively cheap fuel, which fueled pretty strong growth in the mid-70s for many of them.
Was that a deliberate subsidy from Moscow, or just how the system worked?
That's debated. Some saw it as an implicit political subsidy to keep allies happy. Others argued it was just an unintended consequence of the slow price mechanism and the sheer abundance of Soviet resources. Probably a bit of both.
And what about Cuba? They weren't exactly energy rich.
No, Cuba was a special case. As an underdeveloped member, it got highly favorable terms, particularly the famous sugar for oil swaps. Within the socialist ideology, this was justified as counteracting unequal exchange, the idea that market prices inherently disadvantage poorer nations.
Okay. What about détente, that period of easing Cold War tensions? Did opening up to the West help COMECON economy?
It definitely brought opportunities.
Yeah.
Western loans, investment, technology transfer, it flowed into the East.
But did it work?
Often, not very well. Any projects using Western tech ran into trouble. There's the famous example in Poland with the Ursus tractor factory using licensed Massey Ferguson technology. It faced huge problems and delays. Capital wasn't always used effectively.
And the downside?
The big downside was debt. As the TOT started to fade in the late 70s, most COMECON countries found themselves heavily indebted to Western banks and governments. Then came the recession of 1979 and 1983, which hit COMECON hard too. Romania and Poland in particular saw major drops in living standards. Most never really recovered fully before 1989.
This whole period seems to highlight how central planning really struggled with efficiency and innovation.
Absolutely, it raises big questions.
Like that story about the Czechoslovak train. Can you tell us that one?
Right. So in the 1970s, engineers in Czechoslovakia designed a really advanced, lightweight, modern underground train for the Prague Metro. State-of-the-art for its time.
Sounds great.
It was. But
Okay.
Technica, the COMECON plan dictated that the trains for Prague should come from the Soviet Union. And the Soviet trains were older technology, heavier, less reliable, more expensive to run.
So Czechoslovakia's own better design was just ignored.
Pretty much. Using the Soviet trains guaranteed production quotas and profits for the Soviet factory involved. It was a classic case of the central plan and probably Soviet interests overriding local innovation and efficiency.
Wow. Wow. So the system actively discouraged better solutions sometimes, but were there counterexamples? Did specialization ever work where a smaller country provided something for the whole bloc, even the USSR?
Yes, definitely. It wasn't all one-way traffic or bad decisions. Czechoslovak trams, for instance, the iconic Tatra T3 model, became the standard tram used across almost all COMECON countries, including the Soviet Union.
Okay, that's interesting.
And Czechoslovak jet trainers, like the L-29 Delfin, were the standard basic trainer aircraft for Warsaw Pact Air Forces for years. Poland, meanwhile, produced light helicopters based on a Soviet Me-2 design, but Poland became the main manufacturer for the whole bloc.
So sometimes a country did become the designated specialist.
Yes, but the catch was often that other countries were then discouraged, sometimes quite directly, from developing competing designs, even if they thought they could do better for their own specific needs. It reinforced dependency on the designated producer.
Okay, so we've seen these internal contradictions, the economic pressures building up, the debt crisis. How did this whole structure finally unravel?
Well, the final act really starts with Gorbachev coming to power in the Soviet Union in 1985, and his policies of perestroika restructuring and glasnost openness.
Did he try to reform COMECON too?
Yes, there was a big push with the Comprehensive Program for Scientific and Technical Progress, launched in 1985. The idea was to sort of jumpstart innovation and cooperation, create a more modern, efficient scientific and technical base for the whole bloc. It was basically the last major effort to put the COMECON economies onto a sounder footing.
And how did that go?
It largely failed. The program demanded huge investments, which further strained the already struggling Soviet economy. It actually made shortages worse in some areas, and the other East European members. They grew increasingly resentful about having to contribute their scarce capital to projects that often seemed designed primarily to benefit the Soviet Union.
The cracks were really showing then.
Big time. The writing was on the wall. By June 1988, a significant shift occurred. Individual COMECON countries were formally allowed to negotiate trade agreements directly with the European community. That was a major symbolic break.
And then Gorbachev's Sinatra Doctrine.
Exactly. The idea that each country could do it their way, that the Soviet Union wouldn't intervene militarily to prop up unpopular communist regimes anymore, that effectively signaled the end was near for the old bloc system, including COMECON.
So the actual revolutions of 1989 across Eastern Europe, they didn't formally kill COMECON, but they made its demise inevitable.
That's a good way to put it. The political ground shifted completely. A COMECON meeting held in Prague in March 1990 was pretty much just going through the motions. The real nail in the coffin came on January 1st, 1991.
What happened then?
That's when the member countries officially shifted all their mutual trade onto a hard currency market price basis. Overnight, the old system of bartering, negotiated quotas, and the transferable ruble was gone.
And the impact?
It caused a massive immediate collapse in trade between the former members. Their economies were suddenly exposed to world market prices, and many of their goods just weren't competitive. It was a huge economic shock on top of the political changes.
So when did they officially pull the plug?
The final COMECON Council session was held in Budapest on June 28, 1991. They formally agreed to dissolve the organization within 90 days. And just a few months after that, in December 1991, the Soviet Union itself ceased to exist.
A truly definitive end to an era. What happened to the former members afterwards? Did they all just rush to join Western clubs?
For the most part, yes. The direction was overwhelmingly westward, especially for the European members. East Germany had the unique path of joining the EU automatically through German reunification in 1990.
Right.
Then you had the big EU enlargements, the Baltic states, Czech Republic, Hungary, Poland, Slovakia, Slovenia, all joined in 2004. Bulgaria and Romania followed in 2007, Croatia in 2013. Many also joined the OECD, the Club of Developed Market Economies.
But not everyone went that route. What about Russia and the non-European members?
Russia, as the Soviet Union's successor state, tried to form new groupings.
Right.
There's the Commonwealth of Independent States, CIS, which had limited success. More recently, things like the Shanghai Cooperation Organization, SCO, with China, and the Eurasian Economic Union, EAEU. For the Asian members, Vietnam and Laos eventually joined ASEAN, the Association of Southeast Asian Nations. So a much more diverse geopolitical landscape emerged. Now, if we really want to understand COMECON's significance, connecting it back, comparing it directly with its Western rival, the EEC, that's incredibly revealing.
Yeah, let's do that. They both aimed for economic integration, you said, but the paths were just fundamentally different. What were those core contrasts? Lay them out for us.
Okay, well, first, structure, size, balance. Completely different worlds. The EEC, back in the 80s, covered about 270 million people, all within Europe. Its focus pretty clearly on maximizing profits, economic efficiency, driven by market forces.
And crucially, it was supranational.
Yes, that's a key point.
Yeah.
The EEC institutions could adopt decisions like removing tariffs, setting standards that were binding on member states. It had real authority, and economic activity was mostly driven by companies and individuals responding to market signals.
Okay, now contrast that with COMECON.
COMECON was geographically vast, 450 million people across 10 countries on 3 continents by its peak. It linked highly industrialized states like East Germany with very underdeveloped countries like Mongolia or Vietnam.
Yeah.
Huge economic
In
disparities.
the Soviet dominance we talked about.
Overwhelming. Remember, the USSR had around 90% of the land and energy resources, 70% of the population, 65% of the total national income of all members combined. The general pattern was the Soviet Union supplying raw materials and energy, and the Central East Europeans supplying finished goods, machinery.
Okay, so vastly different scale and composition. What about how decisions were made? You mentioned COMECON lacked that supranational power.
Right. It never had supranational authority. Its recommendations, even after the interested party rule, needed buy-in from the countries involved. They didn't apply to countries that opted out. And an interested party could still effectively block things through negotiation or foot-dragging.
So decisions came from the top down.
Essentially, yes. Driven by planners, political directives, largely ignoring market signals or private initiative because there wasn't much of either. The interested party principle was really just a workaround for the lack of real binding authority, an attempt to stop Romania mainly from paralyzing the whole thing. It highlighted the weakness, not strength.
Compared to the EEC enforcing rules.
Exactly. The EEC could force members to comply, which drove genuine integration. COMECON could only suggest or persuade unless Moscow applied direct political pressure.
And trade. How did state monopolies compare to market-driven trade?
Worlds apart. In COMECON, foreign trade was almost entirely a state monopoly in each country. This created huge barriers, bureaucratic hurdles, lack of information flow, opportunities for corruption. Producers had little incentive or ability to really adapt to what customers in other COMECON countries actually needed or wanted.
And you often hear that the best stuff was kept for domestic consumption.
There was definitely strong political pressure to do that, keep the highest quality goods at home. And unlike the EEC, where you could argue that growing cross-border trade between private companies helped reduce national rivalries over time, the state-to-state nature of trade often reinforced national rivalries, bargaining over quotas, prices, quality. It could become quite adversarial. And the data shows intra-COMECON trade, apart from that crucial Soviet oil, was actually declining as a share of members' total trade from the 50s onwards, the opposite of the EEC experience.
So fundamentally, they weren't even trying to achieve the same kind of integration.
That's really the bottom line.
Yep.
You could describe COMECON as functioning more like an international protection system. Its main goals were often about coordinating plans, providing bilateral aid, like the oil for sugar deals, maintaining political alignment within the bloc rather than optimizing production across borders.
Protection and planning versus
Versus the EEC, which was much more an international trade system, focused on efficiency, market allocation, competition, consumer choice, driven by the logic of comparative advantage and profit, however imperfectly. One was about control from the center, the other about decentralized market forces.
Wow. This deep dive, it really lays bare the huge, maybe insurmountable challenges of trying to run economies on that scale without proper market signals. COMECON stands as this powerful historical case study of how central planning, especially across borders, really struggled to adapt, to innovate, and ultimately just to keep working.
It really does. And it leaves us with a pretty big question to chew on, something for you, the listener, to consider. Looking back at COMECON versus the EEC, how much do the core philosophical beliefs underpinning an economic system, the ideology, if you like, shape whether international integration efforts succeed or fail? And how much does that still apply today, even in our very different globalized world?
Have you ever been in a room, maybe a little smoky, small stage piano perhaps, and a performer just pouring their heart out? Or, delivering this biting monologue that feels like it's just for you?
Oh yeah, it's a very specific kind of magic, isn't it?
Totally. A stage, a show, some music. But the actual roots, the global journey of this thing we call cabaret, well, they're actually far richer, much more surprising than most of us probably imagine.
Exactly. What often seems like a simple performance, it actually has this lineage stretching back centuries. across continents.
Right.
And it's constantly reinvented itself, adapting to, reflecting, sometimes even challenging society.
And that's really our mission today. We're taking a deep dive into Cabaret.
Mm-hmm.
Our main source here is the comprehensive Wikipedia article on the subject. We want to look not just at what it is, but sort of why it is, how it evolved.
And what those changes tell us, right?
Yeah.
About culture, politics.
And that enduring human need for, well, intimate, sometimes subversive entertainment. Get ready for, hopefully, some real aha moments about this art form.
Definitely.
So maybe let's start by trying to establish a common understanding. What is cabaret? Because it's definitely more than just a typical show.
Right. At its heart, okay, it's theatrical entertainment. So music, song, dance, spoken word, drama, all that can be part of it.
But the setting is crucial, isn't it?
Absolutely key. You'll typically find it in a pub, maybe a casino, hotel, restaurant, or a nightclub, always with a stage, though.
And the audience setup is different, too. They're usually seated at tables, eating or drinking, not up dancing.
Exactly. Creates a totally different dynamic than, say, a concert hall.
Right. And you nearly always have a master of ceremonies, an MC.
Yeah, the MC is vital. Guides the evening, introduces acts, often adds their own commentary.
And thinking about its origins in Europe, it was often aimed at adults, wasn't it? Sometimes with this clearly underground nature.
That intimacy really allowed for that underground feel to flourish. In Europe, you see it strongly tied to satire, social commentary.
But then when it jumps the pond to the U.S.?
Yeah, it shifts. The term cabaret there starts to cover things like striptease, burlesque, drag shows.
Yeah.
Or maybe just a solo singer with a pianist. It's broader, maybe.
It is broader. What do you think that tells us about the different cultural needs it was maybe filling?
That's a great question. I mean, maybe that unique combo in the audience interaction, the food and drink, the intimate setting, it just provided this flexible canvas.
Yeah, like a blank slate.
Exactly. For whatever a particular society was craving, whether that was political digs or just pure escapism. It's not a grand theater, is it? It's much more personal,
Right.
Adaptable.
That makes sense. That direct, almost raw connection between the performer and the audience. You don't get that in bigger places.
Not in the same way, no.
Okay, so let's really get into this. The word itself, cabaret, tells quite a story.
It really does.
It actually started with Picard or Walloon words, camarade or cambray, meaning small room, way back in the 12th century.
Right. And the first time we see cabaret printed, that was in Tournai, 1275.
Wow.
Then by the 13th century, in Middle Dutch, it already meant an inexpensive inn or restaurant.
So, still humble beginnings.
Definitely. It's thought to come from an earlier form. Chambrette, again, little room, or maybe Norman French chamber, tavern, which ultimately comes from late Latin camera, meaning an arched roof.
So the whole linguistic journey from little room to this global stage presence, it kind of mirrors its actual physical evolution.
It really does, perfectly.
And speaking of evolution, France was absolutely the cradle, wasn't it? Especially Paris. Late 15th century, we see the earliest forms.
And these initial French cabarets, they were different from just taverns. They served food and wine, had tablecloths.
A bit more upscale.
Yeah, and they charged by the plate, not the mug. At first, though, they weren't really about entertainment. Musicians might play sometimes, but that wasn't the main draw.
Interesting. So when did that shift?
Well, their status got quite elevated. By the end of the 16th century, they were the preferred places to dine out. And crucially, they started becoming meeting spots for writers, actors, artists. You know, you could imagine giants like La Fontaine, Molière, Racine, all hanging out at a place called the Mouton Blanc.
That's amazing. That really foreshadows their later role, doesn't it, as cultural hubs?
Absolutely. And you see that hint of rebellion early on, too.
Yeah. How so?
Well, by 1773, there was a cabaret called Le Caveau. Became a place where poets, painters, musicians composed and sang songs. But it actually got shut down in 1816
Why?
because the songs were openly mocking the royal government.
No way. So even back then, it had that political edge.
It always had a bit of that streak, yeah.
Yeah.
And that itch just got sharper with the rise of the café concert or café chantant in the 18th century.
Okay, what were they like?
They expanded the offering.
Yeah.
Food, yes, but now definitely with music, singers, maybe magicians. The famous Café des Aveugles even had an orchestra of blind musicians.
Wow.
And they just exploded in popularity. By 1900, Paris had over 150 of these places.
But the real birth of modern cabaret, the kind we sort of picture today, that came later, right?
Yeah.
With Le Chat Noir.
Exactly. 1881, Montmartre. Created by Rudolph Salis. That's widely seen as the first modern cabaret.
What was its key innovation? What made it different?
It deliberately combined the music and entertainment with explicit political commentary, biting satire. That was the core.
And the atmosphere.
Oh, totally unique.
Yeah.
Salas cultivated this incredibly eclectic mix. The description is fantastic. A mixture of writers and painters, of journalists and students, of employees and high-livers, as well as models, prostitutes, and true grand dames searching for exotic experiences.
Quite the crowd.
Right. And Salas himself, the host, he'd open every show with monologues, just roasting the wealthy, ridiculing the government, joking about the news. He wasn't just entertaining, he was provoking.
And having someone like Eric Satie on piano didn't hurt its artistic cred either.
Not at all. It cemented it as a place of both art and attitude.
So it became this social statement, a place for people who wanted to poke fun at the establishment.
Precisely. But as the 19th century closed, things started to diversify again. Some of the older, more traditional cabarets started getting a bit of a less classy reputation.
Yeah, I saw that quote from a critic in 1897.
Right, the one about verses which, for the most part, are worth nothing. Ouch.
Yeah. So did that open the door for new kinds of venues?
It really did. You started seeing specialization. Places like the Boîte Furzy just focus on current events, politics, satire. Others went purely theatrical.
And some pushed the boundaries even more.
Oh, yeah. You got the macabre, the erotic, like the Cabaret de la Fin du Monde. Servers dressed as gods presenting these risque living tableaus.
Wow. So real niche marketing starting there.
Definitely. Though a few of the old-style artistic places survived, like Lapinagel, still attracting poets like Apollinaire.
Now, while all this was happening with traditional cabaret, something else was arriving from London, right? The music hall.
Exactly. Landed in Paris around 1862. And these offered much more lavish productions, big spectacles.
And there was some pushback from traditional theaters.
Oh yeah, big time. They actually tried to get laws passed to stop music hall performers from wearing costumes or dancing. They were scared of the competition.
But it didn't work.
Nope. The public loved the music halls, the law got repealed, and the way was cleared for these huge shows.
And that led to some iconic places.
Absolutely. Joseph Ohler's Moulin Rouge, 1889, world famous. The Red Windmill, the Can-Can.
Launched huge careers. Mistinguett, Piaf.
And immortalized by Toulouse-Lautrec's posters, of course. Ohler also opened Olympia in '93, the first place actually called a music hall.
And some were just unbelievably extravagant.
Totally. Think about the Printania in 1903. It had a music garden that could seat 12,000 people.
12,000?
2 dinner shows a day, 23 different acts, including lions, bears, elephants.
That's insane. It sounds like this constant race to be more spectacular.
It really was. And in the 20th century, competition from movies pushed them even further.
Right. So places like the Olympia Paris added grand staircases.
Yep. Competing directly with the Folies Bergère. And the stars got bigger. Josephine Baker at Olympia in the 20s. Mistinguett, Maurice Chevalier at the Casino de Paris.
And it continued after the war, too.
Oh, yes. Lolito opened in '46, hosting huge international names. Marlene Dietrich, Laurel, and Hardy.
Wow.
And Crazy Horse Saloon in '51, known for its artistic striptease and magic.
So even though Paris maybe has fewer of those grand music halls today, mostly for tourists.
The more traditional cabarets, the ones with music and satire, they're still around, still thriving in their own way.
It's just fascinating, isn't it, how French cabaret kept changing. From a quiet dining spot to political satire hub to these massive spectacles.
It's just proof of its incredible adaptability.
That adaptability really is key.
Yeah.
Because if we connect this to the bigger picture, you see how this performance style, born in one country, just travels the world.
And reflects and influences totally different cultural and political landscapes.
Yeah.
It's like a cultural chameleon.
It really is. And that spirit definitely went global, taking on these distinct national flavors. Like in the Netherlands, starting around 1885.
Right, Kleinkunst.
Yeah.
Small art, often in theaters. They even have a cabaret academy in Amsterdam.
And what's the Dutch style like?
Usually a mix, stand-up comedy, some theater, music, but often with social themes, political satire.
So maintaining that critical edge.
Very much so. Think of their big 3 mid-century. Sonneveld, Cannes, Hermans. And they have that amazing New Year's Eve tradition, the Agers Conference.
Oh, yeah. Tell me about that.
It's a broadcast where a comedian basically reviews the whole past year, pokes fun at events, politicians. It's a huge national thing, a shared moment of humor and reflection.
That sounds brilliant. Now, shifting to Germany, cabaret, that really found its voice during the Weimar era, didn't it? Mid-1920s.
It absolutely did. It started developing earlier, around 1901, with places like Oberbrettel. But Weimar Cabaret became legendary for its biting political satire, that distinct gallows humor.
Given the times, that makes sense. How did it manage to be a center for underground movements, even opposing the Nazis?
Well, again, that intimate setting, combined with its history of social commentary, it was just a natural space for dissent.
Right.
And that gallows humor, it was a way to cope, to mock the absurdity and the darkness of their political reality. It allowed for critique that was maybe impossible elsewhere, a vital space for resistance.
Makes perfect sense. Okay, let's jump to Poland. Cabaret there, starting around 1905. Still hugely popular today, right? Often on TV.
Hugely popular, usually comedy troupes doing sketches, monologues, songs, and definitely political satire,
Yeah.
often using clever double meanings to get around censors.
Smart. And its roots go back to a literary cabaret.
Yeah, Zlony Balonik in Krakow, founded by poets and artists. And interestingly, there were also Yiddish-language cabarets, Kleinkunst, in Poland between the wars.
And a key difference in Poland, especially after the war, is that it's more about the touring troupe than a specific venue.
Exactly. Which suggests maybe a focus on the performers themselves, carrying that spirit with them, probably crucial for spreading commentary, especially under difficult regimes.
Right. Now, when Cabaret hit the U.S., imported by Jesse Louis Lasky in 1911, it really took a different path, didn't it? Why do you think it diverged so much, especially with jazz influencing it?
It seems to be about different cultural priorities, maybe.
Yeah.
In Chicago, for example, the focus really became the larger band ensembles, especially during Prohibition and the speakeasies.
Ah, the music, the energy.
Exactly, the forbidden thrill. New York Cabaret, though, it never really developed that strong tradition of overt social commentary like in Europe.
More about the performers.
Yeah, when it featured jazz, it tended to spotlight these amazing vocalists. Nina Simone, Bette Midler, Eartha Kitt, Peggy Lee. It was more about star power, musical performance. Julius Monk's reviews in the 50s and 60s really set that standard.
So, less overtly political, more pure entertainment focused. It did decline a bit in the 60s, right, with rock concerts and TV variety shows taking over.
Yeah, it faced challenges. But I kind of found a niche, survived in those Las Vegas-style dinner shows.
But encouragingly, there's been a revival late 20th, early 21st century.
Definitely. Especially in cities like New Orleans, Chicago, Seattle. New generations are finding it again, reinterpreting the old forms, original music, burlesque, even political satire creeping back in.
And New York City even has the Bistro Awards since '85, so it seems like its adaptable core is helping it bounce back.
It really seems that way. And it wasn't just the U.S. adapting it either. Over in the U.K., you had the Cabaret Theatre Club open in London in 1912.
Right, later called the Cave of the Golden Calf, opened by Frida Strindberg.
That's the one. Modeled on Vienna's Cabaret Fledermaus. She intended it as this avant-garde hub for bohemians, fancy decorations by artists like Jacob Epstein.
Very artsy, but didn't last long in that form.
No, it quickly turned into more of a playground for high society before going bankrupt. Avant-garde doesn't always pay the bills, I guess.
True. But even in its short life, it introduced cabaret to London, set a model for nightclubs, and there was some scandal.
Oh yeah, a famous police visit about its entry system. Apparently, a certain duke had to make a quick exit via the kitchen lift.
Classic. Perfectly cabaret.
Totally. And the global reach just keeps going. Further afield, think about Iran. Had a really vibrant cabaret scene until '79.
Really? Where?
Lal Azhar Street in Tehran was the main center. Famous Persian cabarets were active there, launching lots of local artists until the revolution. Sometimes they just call it home of dance or dancing place.
Fascinating. And Sweden, too. An underground scene.
Yeah, Stockholm had the Fattighuskabaren, the Poorhouse Cabaret, ran for 10 years, 74 to 84, launched future celebrities. It's a recurring theme, isn't it? Cabaret is a launch pad.
It really is. And even super recently, Serbia got its first dedicated cabaret club, Lafayette, in Belgrade in 2019, despite having a rich nightlife already.
Just shows the form keeps finding new homes, new audiences.
It really does. And connecting that back to the bigger picture, it just vividly shows how this performance style, born in one place, travels, adapts, reflects totally unique cultures.
It's not just copied, it's fundamentally reimagined each time.
Which brings us nicely to some of the most iconic spaces and the legendary faces that really embody that spirit across time and place. This is where you really see the sheer breadth.
Absolutely. I mean, look at the venues. They span the globe, wildly different eras and styles. You've got the historic glamour of the Moulin Rouge in Paris.
And the artistic striptease of Crazy Horse.
Then in New York, the sophistication of Café Carlyle or Feinstein's 54 Below carrying on that more refined tradition.
But then, okay, here's a curveball from the list. Cabaret rooms at various Chuck E. Cheese's Pizza Time theaters.
Ha! Yeah, that's quite a jump, isn't it?
It's a universe away from the avant-garde daddyism of Cabaret Voltaire in Zurich, or the brand new Lafayette in Belgrade. What does it mean that Cabaret can stretch to include Chuck E. Cheese?
I think it speaks to the fundamental versatility of the form itself.
Yeah.
That core idea, intimate stage, often food and drink, direct engagement with the performer. The content might change dramatically from data poetry to animatronic mice, but the essence of that connection, that framework, it somehow remains.
And the artists who've defined these spaces, just legendary icons like Josephine Baker, Marlene Dietrich.
Eartha Kitt, Edith Piaf, their names are just synonymous with cabaret, aren't they?
Completely. They used that intimate setting, didn't they, to forge these incredibly deep connections, whether through raw emotion or sharp wit or just dazzling presence.
They absolutely did. What stands out to you looking back at this huge variety of places and talents over the centuries?
It really hammers home that cabaret isn't just one specific genre. It's almost a framework for performance.
That's a good way to put
A
it.
framework you can fill with almost anything. Political commentary, family fun, high art, pure spectacle. It's just astonishing how resilient and universal that basic framework has proven to be.
It really highlights how adaptable, how universally appealing those core elements are. Intimacy, directness, performance, regardless of the cultural context or the specific artistic flavor.
So, reflecting on our journey then,
Hmm.
we've gone from a literal small room in medieval France.
All the way to the dazzling stages of Paris, New York, Tehran, Belgrade, everywhere.
Discovering how cabaret just constantly reinvented itself. It's been this blend of entertainment, sure, but also wit, satire, and sometimes really profound social commentary.
It's definitely an art form that's always responded to its time.
Yeah.
Acting is both a mirror reflecting society and often a daring challenger pushing against its norms.
Yeah. It feels like its enduring power lies in that combination, doesn't it? That intimate yet somehow explosive nature. It's performance art that really demands you be present. It allows for that direct engagement, and it often, maybe usually, dares to speak uncomfortable truths.
Right, so here's a final thought then. In our current age, totally saturated with digital experiences, cranes everywhere,
Yeah.
does that raw, immediate, often subversive spirit of cabaret, does it maybe hold a deeper appeal now? Perhaps even more vital today than ever before? Okay, let's dive in. You know the date, May 5th, and, well, you almost certainly know the name people connect to it. Cinco de Mayo, maybe for you it means parties, tacos, perhaps a margarita or two. But there's this whole fascinating, often kind of surprising history behind the date. It goes way deeper than just the party vibes.
Absolutely. And the source material we're exploring today, a deep look from Wikipedia on Cinco de Mayo, it really reveals a story that's much richer, more complex than that popular image. You've got international politics, a really pivotal battle, and then these very different ways history gets remembered, celebrated across borders.
Right, and this Wikipedia article is going to be our guide for this deep dive. Our mission basically is to pull out the key nuggets here. We want to understand the actual historical event, like why it happened, its significance then and now, and how the celebration itself evolves so differently in Mexico versus the United States, and even globally, apparently. Let's just jump right in.
Okay. So what's really fascinating is the lead up, the context. Cinco de Mayo, its roots are in what's called the Second French Intervention in Mexico. This was happening after Mexico had already been through the Mexican-American War and the Reform War, which was this brutal civil war between liberals and conservatives. It left the country's treasury, well, basically empty.
Wow, seriously. So Mexico was already in a terrible financial state before the French even showed up.
Precisely. And here's like the critical moment. Facing this bankrupt treasury, President Benito Juarez makes this drastic call in July 1861. He suspends all foreign debt payments for 2 years. Think about that. It wasn't just some internal budget thing. It was the move that basically invited foreign powers back onto Mexican soil. And understandably, this did not sit well with the countries Mexico owed money to France, Spain, and the UK.
Okay, right. So these three European powers, they team up. Is that what happened?
They did. They held a convention in London, agreed to send naval forces over to Veracruz, to demand repayment, but that's where their paths kind of split. Britain and Spain, they negotiated with Mexico, pulled their forces out peacefully. France, though, under Emperor Napoleon III, he saw a totally different kind of opportunity.
An opportunity for what? Just like collecting the debt, but tougher?
Oh, much, much bigger than that.
Yeah.
Napoleon III decided he'd use this whole situation to try and establish an empire in Mexico, one that would favor French interests naturally. He had this larger vision, this Latin America concept, a term sort of implying cultural ties with France, right? The idea was to rebuild French influence in the Americas and strategically block out Anglophone territories like the U.S.
Wow. So not just money, it was a massive geopolitical power play.
Yeah.
Setting up a French-friendly state right next door to the U.S. Yeah, that's intense.
Exactly. So late 1861, a well-armed French fleet hits Veracruz, lands a big force, and forces President Juarez and his government to retreat. The French army then starts heading inland towards Mexico City. They weren't expecting much resistance, really.
And this is where May 5th comes into the picture. This is the moment they hit that unexpected snag.
Yes, exactly. Moving from Veracruz towards Mexico City, the French army ran into heavy resistance from the Mexicans near Puebla, specifically at the forts there, Loreto and Guadalupe.
And the source mentions the troop numbers, right? The odds were, well, they were pretty stacked against Mexico. That's putting it mildly.
Not in their favor at all, no. The French army had something like 6,500 to 8,000 soldiers, well-equipped professional troops, the Mexican army facing them, maybe 4,000, poorly equipped, often, hastily put together. General Ignacio Zaragoza was leading them.
So nearly 2-to-1 odds, give or take. And the French were seen as like the best army in the world back then, weren't they? Pretty formidable.
Very much so. The source points out the French army hadn't really been beaten in a major fight for almost 50 years, maybe one exception. Their confidence must have been sky high. But then, May 5th, 1862, against all these daunting odds, the Mexicans decisively beat the French army. The Battle of Puebla.
That must have just been huge, an electrifying moment for the Mexican people, real underdog victory against a global superpower.
Oh, a massive morale boost. Absolutely. It really helped forge this sense of national unity, patriotism at such a crucial time with the country under invasion. It was proof they could stand up to a major European power trying to intervene.
Okay, so that's the battle itself. They won. A pivotal fight. Did that just stop the French intervention? Did Napoleon III just pack his bags and go home then?
Well, here's where it gets really interesting, and it's often kind of missed in the modern celebrations. That Mexican victory at Puebla, incredibly significant, yes, for symbolism, for morale, but militarily, it turned out to be pretty short-lived. A year later, 1863, the French came back, this time with a much, much bigger force, like 30,000 troops.
Oh, no. Seriously. So that first amazing victory, it didn't actually stop the invasion in the long run.
Not immediately, no. With this overwhelming force, they managed to defeat the Mexican army this time around. They captured Mexico City, and they installed a European monarch, Archduke Maximilian III of Austria, as the ruler of Mexico. He ruled for 3 years, 1864 to 67.
So the victory on May 5th, 1862, it didn't actually prevent the French takeover and the whole empire thing.
Not right away, you're correct. But the situation started shifting dramatically around 1865. What else was happening then, especially just north of the Mexican border?
Ah, right. The American Civil War was wrapping up.
Precisely. With the Civil War over, the United States was suddenly in a much stronger position. They could start enforcing the Monroe Doctrine, provide more political, military aid to Mexico to help kick the French out. So Napoleon III suddenly finds himself facing pressure from all sides. You've got persistent Mexican guerrilla resistance led by Juarez and Porfirio Diaz.
Right.
You've got the looming threat of war with Prussia back in Europe, and crucially, the real possibility of a serious clash with a newly reunited, powerful United States looking south.
Ah, so Napoleon III is getting squeezed. Resistance in Mexico, trouble brewing in Europe, and now the U.S. is flexing its muscles again. It's a lot of pressure. Sounds like the U.S. getting involved was a pretty big factor in him rethinking this whole Mexico adventure.
It really was a major factor. Faced with all this, Napoleon III started pulling French troops out in 1866. The Mexicans were then able to recapture Mexico City, Maximilian I. He was apprehended, executed in 1867. Benito Juarez re-entered the capital, reinstalled his legitimate government.
Okay, so the Battle of Puebla didn't win the war on its own,
Yeah.
but maybe it bought Mexico crucial time against that first smaller invasion, and more importantly, it became this powerful symbol of resistance.
Absolutely. Its significance was both national and international. Nationally, it was that incredible underdog story, beating a powerful, supposedly unbeatable army, that critical morale boost,
Hmm.
a symbol of standing up to foreign intervention.
And internationally, what was the impact beyond just Mexico?
Well, there's this fascinating historical argument the source mentions from a historian named Justo Sierra. He suggested that if Mexico had not won at Puebla on May 5th, 1862, France might have felt emboldened or maybe just freer to give substantial help to the Confederacy during the American Civil War, which could have potentially changed the outcome of that war.
Whoa. Hold on. So Mexico's victory against the French might have influenced the U.S. Civil War.
Yeah.
That's a pretty big claim. Does the source give like specific evidence, documents or quotes from Napoleon III saying, "Oh, Puebla happened, guess I won't help the South now"? Or is it more of a historian's what if?
The source presents it more as an argument Sierra put forward, highlighting it as one perspective on the battle's broader international significance. It really points to how interconnected these events were, even across continents. The source also kind of touches on the idea that the whole failed French intervention might have been the last time a country in the Americas was invaded by a military force from another continent, though it gets a bit nuanced about invaded versus attacked or defended. But yeah, the core significance of Puebla really remains that morale boost and the symbol of resisting foreign power.
Okay, right. So that's the deep history of the battle, the war. Now, let's shift gears. Let's talk about the holiday itself. How did this single battle turn into, well, the annual thing we see today?
Well, on May 9th, 1862, just 4 days after the battle, President Juarez declared the anniversary a national holiday. It was called Battle of Puebla Day, or Battle of Cinco de Mayo. It really gained prominence, though, during the long rule of Porfirio Diaz. He actually fought in the battle himself as a young officer.
Ah, so Diaz, who later became this long-serving dictator, he kind of used the holiday for his own political gain.
That's what historian Kelly Ladle Hernandez suggests, according to the source. Diaz strategically turned Cinco de Mayo into a celebration of his own power, his military background. He made it something celebrated across Mexico, even by Mexican communities up in the U.S. But because of that strong association with Diaz, after he was kicked out during the Mexican Revolution, that huge conflict aiming for social and political change, the celebrations of Cinco de Mayo actually dropped off quite a bit in much of Mexico.
Ah, okay. That explains why it's often surprising for people in the U.S. to learn it's not like the biggest national holiday in Mexico today, not like Independence Day.
Exactly. The commemoration of the battle, it's not a statutory national holiday in Mexico now, which means, it's not a required day off work across the country. Schools are usually closed, though. It is, however, an official holiday in the state of Puebla, where the battle happened, and also in the neighboring state of Veracruz.
So in Puebla itself, it's still a much bigger deal, more focused on the actual history.
Oh, definitely. In Puebla, they have these large-scale historical reenactments of the battle, parades with people dressed up as French and Mexican soldiers, festivals with artists, musicians, dancers. There's even a mole festival, celebrating the city's famous mole poblano sauce. In Mexico City, you might see occasional military commemorations. And there's a major street named Avenida Cinco de Mayo, but it's not the huge nationwide party many people outside Mexico picture.
Got it. So within Mexico, it's mainly a regional thing, strongest in Puebla, and really tied to the historical event and its local meaning.
That's the picture the source gives from Mexico, yeah. Oh. Let's pivot north of the border, because the story of Cinco de Mayo as a holiday in the United States, that's quite different. It has its own unique evolution.
How did it even start being observed in the U.S.? Was it much later?
Actually, remembrance started almost right away in the 1860s by Latinos, mainly Mexican Americans, out in California, Nevada, Oregon. The source, drawing on research by David E. Hayes Bautista, notes there's compelling evidence that the Mexican community in California started celebrating the victory the very same year the battle happened, May 1862.
Immediately. Wow, that's genuinely surprising. It wasn't something that, grew decades later.
Nope. Seems it was pretty spontaneous. For instance, there was a newspaper, La Voz de Mexico in San Francisco, reporting on a Cinco de Mayo celebration up in Columbia, California in May 1862. Apparently, Mexican miners there heard the news of the victory and were so overjoyed they just spontaneously started firing off rifles, fireworks, singing patriotic songs, giving speeches right there on the spot.
Huh. So it began as this really genuine grassroots thing among Mexican Americans, a direct expression of solidarity, connection to what was happening back in Mexico, that fight against European intervention.
Absolutely. Mexican Americans in California were following the news really closely. They formed political groups, the Juntas Patrióticas Mexicanas. These were like patriotic committees. They met monthly, raised money to send down to President Juarez to support the war effort, and they used the Battle of Puebla as this powerful rallying cry for democracy, resistance against the French back home. The first formal commemorations in big cities like LA and San Francisco happened in 1863. Parades, speakers, music, even women's groups got involved, providing aid and holding their own Cinco de Mayo events.
So the U.S. celebration has these really deep roots in activism, political solidarity, support for Mexico's struggle. Yeah, that's a world away from just being a party day.
That's the critical early history the source documents. This modern American focus on Cinco de Mayo, it really started in California in the 1860s as a direct response to that resistance against French rule in Mexico. And according to the source, it's been celebrated in California continuously ever since 1863.
Okay, so it starts with activism, solidarity among Mexican Americans. When did it morph into, well, the big commercial party we often see today, kind of spreading across the whole country?
Right. The holiday started moving beyond California into other parts of the U.S. around the mid-20th century. It gained some traction with the Chicano movement in the 1940s and onwards. That movement focused on Mexican-American empowerment, identity, civil rights. But it didn't really hit that widespread nationwide popularity until the 1980s.
What happened in the 80s specifically? What was the trigger for it to just, explode?
Marketers, particularly beer, wine, and tequila companies, they saw the potential in the day's celebratory nature. They started promoting it really heavily, often positioning it as just a general celebration of Mexican culture, focusing on food, drinks, music.
The marketing dollars flooded in and just amplified it massively.
Yay.
Yes, and it worked dramatically. Today, the source notes, Cinco de Mayo generates beer sales comparable to huge American events like the Super Bowl. It's really evolved into this widespread cultural and commercial event across the U.S. It often highlights aspects of Mexican culture, cuisine, heritage, sure, but it's heavily influenced, shaped by commercial interests, especially alcohol. There was a Washington Post article from 2023 mentioned in the source that kind of described modern Cinco de Mayo in the U.S. as essentially an American holiday now, just one with Mexican roots rather than being strictly a Mexican holiday as it's celebrated in Mexico.
That's a really, really insightful way to frame it. It definitely has those genuine historical Mexican roots, those ties.
Yeah.
But the modern popular celebration most people run into, very much an American phenomenon, driven by different things from that early activism right through to later marketing campaigns.
And what's also fascinating is how the celebration has even spread elsewhere around the world, influenced largely by the American version, it seems.
Seriously. Beyond Mexico and the U.S., where?
Yeah, the source mentions events tied to Cinco de Mayo in places like Canada, the Cayman Islands, Jamaica, Australia, London, New Zealand, South Africa, Nigeria, even Japan.
Japan. Okay, that one's genuinely unexpected. What on earth are they doing in Japan for Cinco de Mayo?
Well, in places like Osaka and Tokyo, it's apparently celebrated as more of a festival of general Latin American culture. Much like in the U.S., these global celebrations often emphasize Mexican food, culture, music, though the activities can vary wildly. You get the typical food and music stuff, but also things like air guitar competitions or even organized skydiving boogies mentioned for some places.
That is truly wild. Okay, so an unexpected military win in 1862, Mexico eventually leads to skydiving in Canada and air guitar in the Cayman Islands. It just goes to show how a historical event can be taken, reinterpreted, adapted in incredibly different ways across borders and over time.
It really does. It's a pretty powerful example of cultural evolution, isn't it? How symbols can travel and pick up entirely new meanings far from where they started.
Okay, let's bring this deep dive toward a close then. We've covered a lot of ground. From that crucial against the odds military victory back in 1862 Mexico, through occupation, eventual expulsion, all the way to this massively commercialized, widespread celebration in the modern U.S., and even touching on its surprising global spread.
Yeah, so to kind of synthesize the key takeaways from our source material here, the Battle of Puebla, hugely significant morale boost, a powerful symbol of resistance against foreign intervention, even if the victory itself didn't immediately stop the French takeover. And the way the anniversary is marked today, vastly different depending on where you are. More solemn, regional, historical commemoration in Mexico, especially Puebla. Then you have the U.S., where it's a widespread cultural and commercial event, its roots in Mexican-American activism, but massively shaped later by marketing. And then these global offshoots, often modeled on the American version.
It really makes you think, doesn't it? How historical events can take on such different meanings based on location, who's remembering them, and maybe, especially in the U.S. story, how they get marketed. This deep dive really shows that a date you think you know well, like Cinco de Mayo, has all these layers of history, cultural change, even those geopolitical ripples hidden just beneath the surface.
And that brings us to maybe a final thought. Based on the source's historical analysis, consider again that argument we mentioned, the idea that Mexico's victory at Puebla might have influenced the American Civil War outcome by potentially deterring French aid to the Confederacy. What does that mere possibility suggest about the often hidden, interconnectedness of historical events? How things happening on one continent could potentially affect major events on another in ways we might not immediately see. Something to mull over.